Okay. So here you're running your bootstrap enabled HTML, and you're not really coding any HTML. You're just kind of running the sample, right? And so with a right click, you're going to go inspect, and that will bring up what's called the web inspector. And you can see that it's kind of running its responsive version. And if you collapse that, you see that it reformats, which is kind of a neat demonstration of responsive web. But the reason why I wanted to show you this is you have the HTML elements right here. You have what's called a console. The console will show you errors, and when we get into the cloud, you're going to use the console a lot, right? The console is what's going on behind the scenes. You may need to enable a developer version of Chrome. Oh, what a fun emoji I have. But I think you may need to go into settings and enable the developer version. I've enabled my developer version long ago, so I forget how that's done. It's just boom, I got into it. It takes like a few button clicks and you're into the developer version. The developer version gives you the ability to inspect the websites. It may be available for you from the get-go, so it's been a while since I've done that. But now the elements are the HTML pieces that we're going to code. But with it, before I get all involved in the HTML, I just want to say that most web browsers give you the opportunity to select pieces of the site, and then it will show you the HTML that rendered that part of the site. So if you can bear with me here, it says that pointer, that icon with the square and the pointer. I'm going to touch it, and then it's going to light up, and that enables me to select different pieces of this website, and it will highlight different elements of the page. And this is the best way to learn HTML, because when you see something that you like, you turn on the web inspector, and then you turn on this selector. You say, well, how does he make those links right there? And how do I get the drop-down to work? And how do I get that inside of the drop-down? Well, you can see on the opposing side, that's how to code that. And if you type that in, then you'll get that result. Now, just a few things about Bootstrap, and let me elongate this. This is the navigation bar, and it's just reformatting. I can kind of parse the HTML, and it will show me what that line is doing, what that line is responsible for. So if you have a wacky looking site, good job. In order to if you have a wacky looking site and things are not rendering quite the right way, largely you just need to think about the way that your HTML is working. So let's go through the HTML piece. Now HTML is really going to be a couple of components. The head is similar to a pre-compiler directive in Java. It's where the browser is told where the elements are the page needs in order to run. So you'll see inside the head here, there's a lot of meta, which assists search engines and assists with the, we're not going to deal much with meta, it assists with the setup of the page. But then the first line that you really need, the title, carousel template for Bootstrap, that shows up there. And then the link right there, that is the first line that you're going to need, and it links to the CSS, the cascading style sheet that contains all the Bootstrap, all the styling for that Bootstrap. So if I click that, it should highlight it. But what's interesting that the Bootstrap enables the styling of elements that show up inside the body. And the body is the visible element within the page. The body is the stuff the user can see. Does that make sense? That's a good quiz question. So the body is everything that is visible. So what happens is the head makes the body possible. Now largely that's true because there are traditional HTML elements like div. Div are boxes, and stuff will appear inside the boxes. So you can make different boxes on your page and they will have different appearances. But Bootstrap is really a list of classes. You see how it says class right there? that class navbar wrapper, here, let's click on that, is loaded up with a series of properties and styles that are showing up right here. So the navbar wrapper div is a block of HTML. A div is just a square. That's the square. And that navbar wrapper is the navbar. And when you say class is equal to navbar wrapper, these various properties like 14-point text, the background color, the font, those will pertain and apply to that block. Now, websites are built of squares. There are no circles on websites. Everything on websites are squares, and the squares are called divs or dividers, and every div has padding, border, and margin. Those three, and they have a general set of computed dimensions. Now, divs are very useful to web design because we'll always think of the page as a set of squares. And every square has a height and a width and an offset from the left and right and a margin, padding, border. And because of that, we can adjust the various parameters so that we can make squares look differently. Now, within Bootstrap, Bootstrap employs what's called a grid. And so really the Bootstrap site is the best learning resource for Bootstrap. Does that make sense? Now what Bootstrap gives you is it gives you about 12 units that cross every page. So you can have columns that are 3 4-unit columns, or you can have an 8-unit column and a 4-unit column in one place, or a 3 and a 6 and a 3, right? So there are always 12 units across the Bootstrap grid. And so our columns could be of different width if we want them to go across. Now, just in case we don't have enough room, what Bootstrap will do is it will compress, and it will make those 8 units look differently. So here's an 8, and there aren't quite 12 units left. So it will compress it so that it will become legible no matter what the viewport width. Now, we'll repeat that again and again and again. Okay, but I just want to put it out there that it's Bootstrap's job to work with 12 units in total and compress or elongate them depending upon the number of units. And it also means that when you make a website with Bootstrap that you can have a certain number of vertically appearing columns. Now that's particularly valuable when you think about the way that websites, you know, like news websites. So we're at college, so everybody reads the Huffington Post. And you notice there's a series of columns there, right? There's a certain geometric math to the way that they align columns. Now, these are very significant stories, so they're divided into 2. There's one big story right there, so it goes across, right? One column breaks into 2. And as you get into smaller stories, you get into smaller columns, right? And it's communicating importance to people. And then if it gets even smaller, right, it's going to go maybe into 4. Trigger alert. So that's the big story behind Bootstrap. So what we do is we put a div is a box, we give it a class, and the class will give it different properties. And what we do is we put a series of divs inside of a container, and then what we do is we put these divs as we like it. So what you're going to do is you're going to study the formation of this navbar and how it appears. And you'll realize that we have a UL, or an unordered list. And the unordered list are these links. And then inside of that UL, we have LIs, and those are called list items. Now back in HTML 3 and 4, a list item would be a bullet. You know, in Microsoft Word, you have like a little dot, and that's a bullet. But inside of Bootstrap, that LI turns into any series of items that you want to have styled. So list item, if I click under list item, the list item of class active will appear this way. It has a certain amount of padding to the left and to the bottom. And it has a certain look that it inherits. And this will fall into place as you get used to it. Today's going to be the hardest day of class because you're getting used to this barrage of information, right? This fire hose of information. But you notice right here inside the list item, you have an A. The A is a hyperlink. And a hyperlink inside of HTML is called href, or a horizontal reference. Now, old horizontal references look like this. Here, let's go to a really old style website. This is the way that links used to look. They used to have links, links used to have lines under them. So we would call them horizontal references. Nowadays, most links do not look this way. Most links look like this, right? It might underline when we touch it, but we don't know that it's a link until we get over it. Most things within websites will be stylized. Now let's look at a really stylish website. NPR usually does a great job. So you notice that that's a link, but it's not underlined. The minute that we touch it, we hover over it, and it turns a different color when we hover over it. It's a good example, right? So we hover over that. Good. So what this means is we have a navigational structure, and all of these are links. They're all going to go places. So what happens is we put the href, and then after the href, we put the fully qualified domain name, or the URL of where we want the person's click to go. And that's really everything that you need to know in the first week. You need to be thinking about the navigational structure and then where that hyperlink will go. And you guys are particularly gifted right now because you're working with S3, which is on Amazon. And URLs are a great thing to be thinking about right away because now you have a page, and that page has a URL that it goes to. That's the URL to that page. So I click on that URL, and it has a distinctive place where you go when you touch things. And that's Tim Berners-Lee's internet. It's full of links. And the links have meaning, right? There's a purpose for that link. You have arrived. So URL is a fairly pregnant concept with the internet. And let me just say that the URL is such an important concept that the URL is what links the mobile world to the internet right now. So this is interesting. Remember how we were talking about Google ushering in a world of web apps, software that runs in the browser? But guess who brought back the idea of software that runs on the device without a browser? Well, that would be Apple, right? The App Store on the iPhone has ushered in a paradigm where people are moving away from browsers for large pieces of the day in order to interact with HTTP traffic, Facebook, Snap, Twitter, Instagram, Amazon's mobile app, right? All the various apps out there. They're all venues and conduits for HTTP. Now, what ties the internet and those apps together is the URLs, because each of those apps has its own distinct URL that enables interoperability and message sharing between what you're doing on your web browser and what you're doing on your phone. And that also enables you to be directed to app stores, right, to download apps, even though you're visiting websites, right? So URLs are the most important concept that's knitting together the various internet experiences, be they mobile, video game, or browser. So that URL is kind of sacred ground. Now in the future, you guys are going to be trained to embed data inside of that URL. It's called a URL parameter. And send data along with your HTTP requests across the internet. It's powerful. So that's what makes a lot of our phones and the internet interoperable, is these URLs. And I just wanted to talk about that as I talked about this navigational structure. Okay, so I wanted to reveal, and then we close the LI. That's a closing tag. We close the A, the anchor, right, when we're done. And then we close the div, and that enables us to make HTML and closing HTML tags. And once we close the tag, we stop formatting that item on the page, right? So opening up the tag and then closing it is the way that we code HTML. Okay. Now there's probably hundreds of thousands of different combinations of HTML out there, but a lot of these core HTML, div, body, head, UL, LI, A, href, image, IMG, these are the building blocks of the web. And there's only a few other tags that you really need to know. You need to know the P tag, the paragraph tag, and that's about it. The div is the most important tag in the internet because it allows every page to be formatted. So each of these are divs. And if you can format the div, then you can format all the content inside of it. And you can put an image inside of it. So as long as you're okay with divs, you can make columns inside of Bootstrap, and then you can make content. And what we're going to focus on next week is actually moving data around the internet and then making that data show up inside of a div. Okay? So if you guys can put those concepts together, div, CSS, class, you're going to be little ninjas. Now, the one concept that I wanted to go over while we have time is the fact that Bootstrap is full of classes. Let me back up. And let me link to Bootstrap carousel. And let me show what a carousel looks like. You move around. Have you ever seen these before? These are like everywhere. I was just showing the students the Mercedes-Benz. I believe it's mbusa.com. I don't spend a lot of time on the Benz website, but usually Benz does a good job. You see that carousel? They're just using the same kind of carousel that's right here. But what I want to say is, if you want to make a carousel happen, you go class, you first make a div, then you go class, carousel slide, and then you do a few other things, and you do these steps, and you make a carousel using these lines. You just copy and paste them and then customize. It'll work right away. You'll be making a carousel in 5 minutes. And that's because of the combination of skills that you guys have. The div, the inspect element. But what I want you to think about is everything on your page is important. Like, for example, here are their upper end vehicles, here are their SUVs, here are their sedans. But what if Benz wanted to study which parts of the page people were clicking on the most? And what if they wanted to correlate parts of the country and the different cars that people were most interested in that parts of the country? Could Benz optimize their sales experience? Like, for example, I live in the Inland Empire. It's all about off-road. It's all about dirt. Does that make sense? Versus where I was last weekend, I was in Santa Barbara. Not a lot of dirt bike traffic in Santa Barbara. It's all about convertible, right? It's about the high end. Where I'm from, it's all about dirt, off-road, trucking it. So is there a way to make a Mercedes-Benz store that's optimized for Santa Barbara based on the web traffic and what people are touching there? Sure. Is there a way to optimize the Inland Empire experience? Maybe put the SUVs out there. There's still billionaires in the Inland Empire. Like, there's still people buying Mercedes-Benzes, right? But their tastes are different. So the reason why I bring this up is the web is really a way to understand people. It's really a behavioral laboratory where we can understand big pieces of the public better. And you should see your website as a way to study and understand your demographic better. You shouldn't see your website as a final product. Like, here, worship the site. Instead, you should see it as a way to capture more understanding of the people you're in touch with. Now, that happens when you say, hey, look at this big image. Do people touch that slide? Do they link to this slide? Do they press the explore here? Or do they explore this? Right? Or do they explore this? You foxy young kids, when you get out of school, you're getting this, right? This is you. This is the graduate car, right? This is the Cal Poly Pomona car. Now this is me, kids in the back, right? And who's this? This is for when the kids are gone, right? And the money's pouring in, right? And a $100,000 car. But which one do we touch? You know, the efficiency cars. What is that? I don't know what that is. I'm making fun of you. But what I'm getting at here is the class is what makes the HTML appear with the styling. So the class connects to the CSS. But here's this thing called an ID. The ID is what connects to JavaScript. JavaScript can see IDs. CSS can see classes. So when you put the ID and the class together, you have the capacity to program with your HTML elements and to collect intelligence based upon what people are touching or connect to software within the website. Remember, well, I haven't said this, but remember, browsers are compilers. They're interpreters. They compile code. Now, this week we're not compiling code. Next week we're going to compile code. But the code that you're going to write is JavaScript. It's the source code for the internet. Okay? So when you have an ID, JavaScript connects to that ID. So that means that everything you put on the page is suddenly artificially intelligent capable, machine learning capable, right? It's analytic capable. It turns on the cerebral component of the internet. Does that make sense? This is why Facebook, I misquoted Facebook's value the other day. I said, Facebook, worth $300 billion. I was wrong. Facebook is worth like upwards of $500 billion, on the public market. It doesn't earn that much every year, but it's worth that much, right, in terms of its total stock market capitalization. What is Facebook? What does it do? Well, really, it's just a lot of HTML and a lot of analytics. Really, it's an ad sale mechanism. It's a pretty dramatic. Now, it was fun this week to see how Ripple, the cryptocurrency, is now, the CEO of Ripple is worth more than Mark Zuckerberg. That didn't take long, but, let's face it, cryptocurrency is nothing new. But as a side note, I want you to be thinking about and adding IDs to each of your JavaScript this week. And I want you to be creating a list of all the IDs that you make. So that brings us back to our homework, which you are now in a good position to begin. This is what we do in the micro project. Just take a look at the syllabus. Anybody have any epileptic reactions to things? Because I'm about to scroll down this page really quickly. If you don't like to see violent stuff on the page, just close your eyes for a sec. Ready? Close your eyes. Ready? I'm serious. Ugh. Terrible. Terrible. Try to be a nice person and then you bring on a seizure. So here's what your micro project is. Here's what you need to do for next week. And you need to create 5 pages. You need to create a login page and you create these pages. Now, you don't need to create any buttons on any pages. Just create the page and just put the word login at the top. Does that make sense? Because next week we're going to start to work with buttons. You don't know how to make a button yet, so don't make any buttons. And if you know how to make a button, make a button. But you don't have to make a button. Okay?
No actual functionality,
just a page. That's right. So when you think about that, what's the value of what you've done this week? What you've done is you've made like a wooden structure to a house. There's no plumbing, there's no electricity, there's no walls. It's just the skeleton. So we're more interested in skeleton. But then you also need a responsive framework. See my wording? A responsive framework to deliver a navigation structure. Ooh, that sounds technical. Well, that's your navigational. Did I already put that in? That's this. That's your navigational structure, right? That's a fancy word for the black thing. the big black bar, that's a navigational structure. Okay, make that. Now you also should make a footer. So you should investigate how to make an HTML footer. It's really easy. By the way, when you investigate things on the web, you should be using Google. It's fine. Be independent. W3 Schools is good. And then pros use MDN. Go to MDN. That's where real studs go. If you're studly, you go to MDN. See, that's how you make a footer. And you put a footer right inside of the body, and then it will show up on the bottom of the page. And it just says, hey, this is Ian's webpage, copyright 2018. Okay? Footer needs to be in there. And then you need div IDs. Once we start to get into JavaScript, your div IDs that's really what JavaScript is about. JavaScript says, hey, grab this data from the web and put it into this div right over here. It's called getElementById. It's how we program with JavaScript, but I wanted to prepare you for that. So make some IDs for your divs, okay? And then write all the map of all the names of all your divs down on a piece of paper so that you know the information architecture of your page. Can you guys say information architecture? Say it. You don't want to say it. You're not saying it. You can't sit in the second row if you can't say it. You need to say information architecture. Did you say it? Say information architecture again. Good, good. You can't do it if you can't say it. Then when you're in an interview, you need to throw words like that out there and quickly in quick rat-a-tat function. Because people will say like, did you just say information architecture? You'll be like, yes. Okay, that's what we like to say here at Google or Facebook, right? Information architecture is really the strategy with which we will tell the story on the website, the way that we will stimulate people on the website. Okay? Then upload it to AWS, upload, make public. Did we show how to do that? Upload it. Next, yeah. Okay, did we miss anything? Are you going to watch this video like 14 times? It's probably a good idea. You're going to be a success. Okay.